GreenCape is a non-profit organization that drives the widespread adoption of economically viable green economy solutions from South Africa. They are working on a multi-stakeholder project with the financial support of the Green Climate Fund, implemented and managed by UNIDO. Focused on pipeline development to deploy clean energy technology solutions in Municipal Wastewater Treatment Works of South Africa, providing readiness activities for the Green Climate Fund. Ultimately, this project aims to support the utilization of climate finance in the Municipal Wastewater Treatment Works space, where energy efficient and renewable energy applications can assist. This Future Cities Africa episode is with Raldo Kruger, Technical Specialist for Green Finance and the Water Sector at GreenCape. We explore what financiers can consider in partnering with municipalities to fund energy efficiency and renewable energy projects at Wastewater Treatment Works. Raldo, welcome. What are the key financial investment opportunities related to energy efficiency and renewable energy projects at Municipal Wastewater Treatment Works, and how can financiers partner with municipalities?
So perhaps just to give your listeners some background information, a little bit of a backdrop to this. So wastewater treatment works are the large plants that operate at municipalities that process the sewage produced by everyone on a day-to-day basis, as well as some of the industrial effluent. And those wastewater treatment works are designed to treat that wastewater to a point where it can safely be discharged back into the environment or perhaps used for non-potable uses. And wastewater treatment works are one of the single largest energy consumers within municipalities, within the municipal services that municipalities provide. And they can account for around 25% of the total electricity usage by municipalities themselves. And this is within the South African context. As I think most of us know, that the electricity that we draw from the grid in South Africa is still mostly coal-based. So this electricity consumption is associated with obviously greenhouse gas emissions too. And in total, electricity usage by wastewater treatment works at municipalities can account for around 30% of the overall expenditure by municipalities. So it's a significant single cost that municipalities carry in providing the service. In 2015, the National Energy Efficiency Strategy was put out by national government, and the aim for that was to support municipalities or to encourage municipalities to reduce their energy consumption for municipal services by 20%. However, as recently as last year, 2022, the Green Drop reports, which are published by the National Department of Water and Sanitation, which is a kind of a status report on wastewater treatment works in the country, indicated that there's very limited implementation of energy efficiency and renewable energy technologies at municipal wastewater works in South Africa. So the opportunity exists to implement technologies that are mature on the international market, but just haven't been adopted and implemented locally. And because wastewater treatment works operate consistently and predictably over a long period of time, the savings that can be generated through implementing these technologies are predictable, and therefore the opportunity to finance these technologies exists. The kind of headline figures are that even just with some basic energy efficiency technologies that can be retrofitted at these wastewater treatment works, you can gain efficiencies of easily up to 15%. With something slightly more complex, you can gain efficiency gains of up to 50%. And the balance of the energy demand then can be generated from renewable energy sources or other technologies that can be implemented at these wastewater treatment works. So it's really, to sum that all up, probably a no-brainer for municipalities to implement a lot of these technologies, and then for financiers to be able to facilitate is really the opportunity that we're talking about today.
What are the expected returns on investment and typical payback periods for financiers on these kind of projects? And how do they vary based on project scale and location?
what we've done is we've identified 10 technologies that have high potential to be implemented at Wastewater Treatment Works, which I think was unpacked by my colleague Ashton in the previous podcast. And perhaps to answer the question slightly differently, so not so much how the return on investment varies based on location or scale of the project, but rather to categorize these technology types into three categories. So in the first category, you can think of there's a number of interventions and a few technologies that can be implemented at very low cost, or in some instances, even no cost by municipalities, which have very short payback periods, so less than a year or two, which can be implemented across the board by most municipalities, typically using grant funding from national government to implement those types of interventions. And then the second category of technologies we can think of are more kind of on the energy efficiency technologies that can be retrofitted into existing wastewater treatment works that have a 3-year or less than 3-year payback, maybe in some instances 4 to 5 year payback. And then on the other end of the spectrum, when you think of large refurbishments or substantial capital intensive projects that can be implemented when you kind of redesign the wastewater treatment works completely or refurbish it completely and implement energy efficiency technologies within that, some of those paybacks can be on a much longer scale, so maybe 5 to 15 years. I think it's important to think about those three different sort of types of categories of interventions that can be done, and then try and match the financial instrument or the source of funding to the payback periods that's roughly associated with those types of technologies. For the upper end of the scale, when you think of something like anaerobic digestion and then generating biogas and converting that to heat or energy, which is one of the technologies my colleague spoke about in the previous podcast, scale often does come into it there. And for that technology, for example, we know that only very large wastewater treatment works, approximately from 20 megaliters per day capacity and upwards, this technology would be viable. But all the technologies that have a 3 to 5 year payback or a less than 1 to 2 year payback is typically as independent of the scale or the size of the wastewater treatment works, and they can be implemented across the board at all wastewater treatment works. In all likelihood, will be financially feasible.
What types of financing models or mechanisms has been successful in supporting similar projects in the past?
I think most of your listeners will probably be familiar with the grant system that municipalities predominantly operate on. So they apply for grant funding from the national fiscus to implement infrastructure projects and provide services to constituents within municipalities. And so typically when you look at those low cost interventions with short payback periods, the best or most advisable route for municipalities to implement these projects would be through self-funding it or through grant funding from the various grant sources for municipal services. But there's slightly more complex projects that maybe have a 3 to 5 year payback can also be funded through energy services companies, for example, or ESCOs, through service level agreements with municipalities where the ESCO essentially comes to implement and install the technologies without any upfront capital cost paid by the municipality. And then they essentially provide a service to the municipality over a period of time, and the savings that are gained from the technologies are used by the municipality to pay that ESCO service cost that they associate with that. And then after the contract ends, say after 3 to 5 years, then the municipality fully owns that technology. and can gain the full benefit of the energy efficiency that's gained by those technologies on an ongoing basis. And then for the larger projects, loan financing could be an option, as well as in, I guess, rare instances, probably one could also look at a triple P making sense for implementing really large, complex, and capital-intensive projects.
Raldo, what due diligence measures should financiers undertake when considering investment in municipal wastewater treatment energy projects? And how can these risks be successfully mitigated?
Due diligence ideally should be initiated by the municipality. And so the typical kind of steps that a municipality would go through is developing a pre-feasibility, doing a pre-feasibility study to see which technologies have potential to be implemented and can be financially viable as well. Then, if it passes that initial pre-feasibility, then going on doing a full technical feasibility. And from there, if the implementation is technically feasible, then you would go on and do a more thorough financial viability and feasibility of implementing that project. And I think the onus on potential financiers or investors in these types of projects would add a lot of value in terms of supporting municipalities in ground truthing and checking particularly the financial feasibility and viability of these projects, and really support them also then in identifying the appropriate or best funding options or instruments for that particular project based on financial profile of the project. I think key for financiers and investors to look at, besides the kind of technical feasibility and the financial feasibility, is to ensure that the municipality has the technical skills and internal capacity to both implement and utilize that technology effectively, because most of these technologies are, of course, a lot of these technologies are plug and play, but effectively the gains that can be achieved through these technologies still comes down to how they're managed within the operating procedures of those wastewater treatment works. So that's, I suppose, a key marker to look for, is the kind of technical capacity of the municipality to actually implement and operate these technologies over in the foreseeable future.
What is the current state of municipal readiness when implementing these projects at Municipal Wastewater Treatment Works?
We developed a number of years ago is a index to assess the readiness of municipalities to implement these types of projects at wastewater treatment works in South Africa. And that index essentially takes into account three core metrics. So the one is the overall kind of governance of the municipality. That typically looks at the Auditor General results and the audit outcomes for each municipality. And the second element of that is the affordability of the municipality. So that kind of speaks more to the financial management of the municipality and to what extent they can afford non-grant funding to implement these projects. And then the third element looks at the technical capacity within the water department of each municipality, and looking at key metrics like staff turnover, vacancies within the water department within each municipality, and particularly on the technical part. So it's not a very granular assessment, but it's a high-level assessment taking those three core pillars into account, and then coming up with an overall index of the readiness of the municipality to implement these types of projects. And so what we found is, taking those three metrics into account, about 20% of municipalities in total in South Africa have a very high readiness to implement the full spectrum of projects. So from the simple short payback type of projects to those projects that have a medium sort of payback and medium complexity, to being able to implement a full refurbishment or a very complex project. Another 20% sits at the opposite end of the spectrum, where, in all honesty, the governance, financial management within the municipality and the technical capability within the municipality doesn't justify or makes them not ready or viable to implement any sort of complex project. And for these municipalities, the opportunity still exists to implement some of the very basic interventions that are still going to give you some gains, but that's really the only types of projects that those municipalities can implement. Then the balance, so the other 60% of municipalities sits in that sort of middle ground where they may have some technical capacity, but perhaps their affordability to take on loans for these types of projects isn't there. Or the other way around, where perhaps they can take up loans and team audits, but don't necessarily have the technical capacity to implement these projects. And that's where procurement models like the ESCO or energy services contract can come in to actually be able to implement these projects at these municipalities, taking into account there's slightly limited capacity to implement these projects. And the gains that can be gained through that are still sizable and significant for the energy demand at the wastewater treatment works. So in summary, to just answer your question, so around 20% kind of low readiness to implement these types of projects. The other 20% very high readiness to implement these types of projects, and then the middle 60% have varying degrees of readiness to implement, but are still probably likely to be able to implement quite a substantial range of energy efficiency technologies.
Are there any specific state incentives or grants or tax credits available to financiers that partner with municipalities in the sector?
There are not many specific grants or tax credits that I'm aware of. The only specific grant around energy efficiency for municipalities that I'm aware of is the Energy Efficiency and Demand Side Management Grant, which is available to municipalities. They can apply for it based on the projects that they have in mind. That grant is fairly limited. I'm not sure what the latest figures are, but quite recently when I looked at that, the total grant available for all municipalities in South Africa was in the region of 200 million. And considering there's 256 municipalities in South Africa, you can imagine the actual availability per municipality is quite low. But one thing that one could do, or municipality could do, is to, instead of using that grant to actually purchase hardware to implement, that grant can be used to actually do some of the pre-feasibility work and look at financial modeling around the implementation of these technologies, so that they can then get loan financing or put out a tender for an ESCO to implement these technologies with off-balance sheet financing. Would be one way to kind of stretch that grant a lot further municipalities in South Africa. And then secondly, the typical grant that's used for municipal infrastructure, called the Municipal Infrastructure Grant, or the MEG grant for short. Most municipalities will be aware of this. That can be applied to in this instance, but is typically used for kind of larger refurbishment or revamping of wastewater treatment works. And then within that project, obviously, you can use the most up-to-date and newer technologies within that. So that can be applied as well.
Raldo, in closing, how can municipalities improve their creditworthiness?
It's probably a topic that can take up several weeks of podcast in and of itself. But I think within the context that we're speaking about today, there are some, I think, key principles that can be applied by municipalities more broadly, but also specifically within this opportunity of implementing energy efficiency at wastewater treatment works. But maybe just to start off with the kind of foundation, and there's no real way to circumvent this, but better overall governance within a municipality more broadly is really the key foundation to establishing credit worthiness. So that's from your senior leadership to your overall financial management in your municipality, ultimately leading to clean audits is really the first kind of foundation that most financiers and investors will look at before they think about financing a project at a municipality. And then within that context, there's two kind of slightly different components to credit worthiness. It's your financial governance and financial management, but there's then also the affordability component that comes into play. And they're the typical levers that all of us have to increase our credit worthiness is to reduce our expenditure and to increase our income or increase our revenue. So that's the same context that the same levers that municipalities have in terms of improving their credit worthiness is to reduce their expenditure and increase their revenue. And within the context of this opportunity that we're talking about today, energy efficiency at wastewater treatment works, if you think about the original headline figures that I provided, where up to 30% of a municipality's total expenditure can be attributed to the electricity consumption within wastewater treatment works, and if you can implement technologies that can provide 50% energy efficiency savings with 3-year paybacks, you can make quite a substantial dent in the overall expenditure that a municipality has. And so you're starting to work towards that, increasing the credit worthiness by reducing your expenditure. And a lot of these technologies have very long lifespans. So once you implement it, you get your initial payback, you pay off that technology, then over the next 15 to 20 years, that expenditure line on the municipalities will be reduced by, say, 15 to 20%, which can really add up over a period of time. And then on the increasing your revenue side, if you think about it in a water sector context, but I think it applies to electricity and all other municipal services as well, is if a municipality can improve its ability to collect the revenue that's due to it, then those are essentially the two levers that municipalities have to improve their credit worthiness, and then they can be more likely to be eligible for getting loan financing for more complex projects, which increases their asset base, increases their ability to deliver services, and therefore increases their ability to collect revenue in the long run, which will increase the financial feasibility or financial viability and sustainability of that municipality, which is really the bedrock of credit worthiness. So, it's a very complex and large challenge that we have in South Africa. But I think if you break it down to these smaller components and think about the actual levers that can be implemented and the actual technologies and the actual financial instruments that can be applied in the short run, then it creates the actual mechanisms for municipalities to improve their overall credit worthiness in the long run.
Thank you for this insightful conversation, Raldo. This episode is part of a 3-episode series. Make sure to check out the rest of the series on Future Cities Africa.